So Final Fantasy 3. We are trucking along through these Final Fantasy games. It is actually crazy to me that just a couple of weeks ago I said, oh, hey, I'm gonna play through every single Final Fantasy game that ever came out. And that I've already played through 5 Final Fantasy games. I legit have been beating these games almost 1 game a week. And what can I say other than I've been having a crap ton of fun? Probably should have said this before, but let's jump into the video. How does Final Fantasy 3 hold up in 2021? This game came out in 1990, so I have played this game 31 years after it came out. So let me just start off by saying, I will be completely honest. I loved Final Fantasy 2. By the time I got to 3, I was starting to feel a little bit of that Final Fantasy fatigue. I was starting to feel like it was just a lot of the same, and I also don't want to ruin my Final Fantasy experience by getting too much of the same. But when I started this, something else to note is that I actually played this game throughout my spring break. Now originally I had planned on playing Final Fantasy 2 on my spring break trip, but I got so into that game and put so many hours into it and grinded so much that like a day or two before I had to go out for spring break, I was maybe 5 or 6 hours away from beating the game and I was like, screw it, just gonna beat it. So then I ended up playing Final Fantasy 3 on my spring break trip. Which by the way, I do have vlogs coming out on my spring break because I did go on a hiking trip with my family to the Great Smoky Mountains. So go follow my other channel if you want to see what that was about. But my point is, I was not expecting to beat this entire game throughout my spring break. Not because I can't beat a Final Fantasy game in a week. I clearly have been doing that. But with me going on this trip, I wasn't just gonna be playing video games all day. We had a lot of hiking and a lot of different events planned while we were down there. So I am a little bit amazed at the fact that I was able to beat this game. Because truth is, I legit finished this game in like 2 sittings. Want to get technical. Me and my family had a 10-hour drive to the Great Smoky Mountains. And while usually I would offer to help on this drive, because of the whole thing going on with my head, it is not the safest thing for me to be driving for extended periods of time. So because of that, I took the entire 10 hours playing Final Fantasy 3 on our way there. And on our way back, I spent the entire 10-hour drive playing the game. Not to mention that, but almost every night, not every night, but almost every night of the trip, after we had come back to our little cabin and, you know, I would play the game for like a solid 2 to 3 hours before going to bed. And like I said, I'm gonna be honest, going into this trip, I was starting to feel a little bit fatigued. I remember I started Final Fantasy 3 and I was a little bit like, I'm gonna start it, I'm gonna play it, let's see how far into it I can get until, you know, let's just see what happens. And I don't know what happened. Well, I guess Final Fantasy happened. And I just got really sucked into the game, and I really had a great time. And you know, even though I thought at first I was feeling fatigued, like this game, I don't know, it just helped reignite my excitement for Final Fantasy. I thought I had overdosed on Final Fantasy, but this game brought me back. And the weirdest thing is, it's not like I can say it's one of my favorite Final Fantasies. It's not even like I can say that this one stood out amongst all the ones that I've played so far. But I liked it, I really liked it. Okay, so let's just jump straight into the review itself. So the story. Have much to say here. They bring back this whole idea of the Warriors of Light. Same thing as they did in 1 and same thing as they did in 5. But something that was a little bit unique is that this time they were children. They are kids. I think that was a little bit unique, clever, different. They're all a bunch of orphans and essentially they just gotta defeat darkness. Defeat the cloud of darkness. And no, I'm not referring to this cloud. No, I'm referring to this thing. Or her, or she, or it. Again, nothing super deep. They're the 4 chosen warriors and they have to go save the world from darkness. There's enough in the story for me to say like, okay, that was cool, that was cute. But again, nothing crazy for me to be like, wow, really stood out to me. Not gonna have much spoiler talk in this video, so Final Fantasy 3 in terms of story, pretty good. Gameplay. Unlike in Final Fantasy 2, they went back to with their more traditional form of leveling up, which I still enjoyed. It's like any other Final Fantasy game. They did the same thing as they did in Final Fantasy 5, where you get to choose from a bunch of different classes and really customize your characters. Which again, didn't feel too different from Final Fantasy 2, because you can do the same thing in Final Fantasy 2, except in Final Fantasy 3, you have a direct, you're giving them a specific job and a specific class, and their outfits change as you change them into different classes, which was pretty cool. Now, I liked the job system. I feel like I enjoyed it so much more this time around, and honestly, playing this game makes me want to play 5 again so much more because I feel like I'm just going to appreciate it so much more. Because now I see some of the limitations that this game had in terms of the job system and how Final Fantasy V improved on them so much. Final Fantasy V, if I learn an ability for one of my jobs, I can use that while I have another job equipped. Can't really do that in this one. So the cool thing about this one is you can change their jobs, but each job is kind of like their own thing and you can't really intermix them. And that is something that you do in Final Fantasy V. And now I'm kicking my booty for not having to play this one first
and then be able to appreciate 5 even more. And here I was complaining about 5, but now I feel like 5.
It's an amazing one that I really want to start. I really enjoyed the job system, and like I said, this makes me really want to go back to Final Fantasy V and do that again. Do it! They introduced summons into this game, something that I can't believe I hadn't really noticed that 1 and 2 didn't have, which is kind of cool. I had a fun time experimenting with the different jobs, and because I didn't feel like there were too many to choose from or they were all super unbalanced, I had fun kind of trying them all out and seeing like which one do I have the most fun with, which one do I like to use. At its core, this is just classic Final Fantasy. Played any of the newer games, this one doesn't do anything different. Played any of the older games, it does a couple of new things, but nothing too crazy other than, again, the job system, which is really enjoyable. Out of all of the Final Fantasy games, I think this is the one that I have the least amount to say on it. In terms of the 4 main characters, back when this game originally came out, they were 4 faceless warriors, kind of like in Final Fantasy 1. Not faceless, they didn't really have personalities, It gave you 4 random characters that you got to kind of choose and customize, but didn't have too big of an influence into the story. They did have lines and stuff, but really it wasn't like, oh, this is this character's name and this is that character's name. Now, that is something that I want to talk about.
Okay.
When they remade this game for the DS, which is the version that I played, actually no, I played the PSP version, but anyways, when they remade this game in 3D, they did give these characters names and personalities a little bit. For example, now we had characters like Lunith, Refia, Ark, Ingus. Because there's not too much dialogue in this game, there wasn't too much of an opportunity to really create and develop these characters, especially in the remake. I don't know why they didn't choose to go a little bit deeper into it. Maybe because they wanted to kind of keep the original game a little bit intact. But they did try a little bit, and what they did worked. But these characters are definitely not as deep or as complex as some in the later Final Fantasy games. It's just a little bit. They have little things that make them unique, but nothing that makes each of them super memorable. Because of that, I don't really have anything to say about these 4 characters. Really have nothing to say about Lunith, really. Ark, I guess you can say, is the cowardly kid, who's the smart kid who you're supposed to have as your mage. Refia is similar to Final Fantasy 2. I mean, she's the girl. Ingus, a warrior, and he stands like a cool guy after every battle. Now, what is interesting is I thought I was going to be seeing a character called Onion Knight. Because as you all know, transitioning into the Dissida portion of this video, in Dissida, the character that they have representing Final Fantasy 3 is Onion Knight. That's just the name of the kid. Now, it is cool that they made him a kid, because in Final Fantasy 3, they're all kids. There is no quote-unquote Onion Knight in Final Fantasy 3. What there is the Onion Knight job class. And not even that, in the remake, in the 3D version of it, it is a secret job class. Not really hard to get, but it's technically secret, because you don't get it through the story, through the main story. And in the original game, very original SNES game, Onion Knight is the job class that every character starts off with, rather than in the 3D remake, they are freelancers. But anywho, I thought that was super interesting. So similar to Final Fantasy 1, where in Dissida they created Warrior of Light, they just kind of created Onion Knight. So overall, Final Fantasy 3, good game. Good Final Fantasy game. Nothing super crazy that I'm going to say super stands out to me other than out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is the only game that has been remade in 3D. Well, Final Fantasy 4 has also been remade in 3D. So far for me, it is out of the older games, the only one that I've played in 3D. So I guess that makes it kind of unique for me. You're playing through a Final Fantasy game, but with kids. Overall, I would have to give Final Fantasy 3 a solid 6. Again, 5 being neutral. Anything above it being good. Not even neutral, because I do like Final Fantasy, so it was a good game. Now I want to get to the unboxing portion of this. Yes! So similar to how I did with my Final Fantasy 6 review, I don't currently have the package yet. Plus, something to say about this collectible. It was very hard to get a collectible for this game. Let's talk about that for 2 seconds. Basically, all of the main characters of the Final Fantasy games in Dissida, right here. You got the characters from Final Fantasy 5, 6, 2, and 4. And you have Sephiroth, because, Final Fantasy 7 freaking rules. In this collection, you have Final Fantasy 10, Final Fantasy 9, Final Fantasy 1, Final Fantasy 7, and Final Fantasy 8. Just don't have Final Fantasy 3. They decided not to make an Onion Knight, or a Lunith, or anything like that. So I'm over here like, dang, my collection's just kind of got pooped on, but I have to get something, right? After digging and searching and digging and searching, the closest thing that I can find to an Onion Knights collectible was this little figurine. More like it was a little plushie that resembled this kind of art style. Personally, I'm not really a fan of. Made the dolls look kind of creepy, honestly. I didn't really want that as a collectible. And then I tried looking for maybe not Onion Knight, but one of the other characters, like Lunith, Refia, you know, whatever. And luckily, I was able to find a Lunith little statue. Now, for my collection here, this Lunith is gonna look very different and stand out, just because he's not really gonna match. It's this tiny little thing, I think the size of a quarter. But yeah, it was the best thing that I could find. There is no love out there for Final Fantasy 3 merch. So anywho, let's jump into that now. We'll have it appear in my hand in 3, 2, 1. Here it is. All right, so let's bust open into this little guy. And when I say little guy, I mean tiny dude. Yeah, it's been about a week or two. So, hashtag time travel. Check him out. He's like in a little plastic baggie. All right. Dude, I love it. Oh, I love it. Okay, he's so tiny, but it's high quality. Like the detail on this little guy is actually really, really cool. Check him out. Straight up Lunith. Straight up Lunith from Final Fantasy 3, the remake on the 3D. On the DS. He looks really freaking cool. I am okay with this. I am very okay with this. Again, he doesn't quite match the size of the other peeps. I could almost like do one of these. Look at that. Look at the size. Look at the size difference. Goodness gracious. But that does not take away from the fact that he does look really cool. And I like the detail on it. That's awesome. Okay, so now let's talk about Onion Knight in Dissida. Initial first thoughts and impressions. How does Onion Knight's original story compare to the story in Final Fantasy 3? Again, because he is an original character from Dissida, I don't know why I added quotation marks, he really is. I was a little bit concerned as to how they were gonna work in and bring in Final Fantasy 3 uniqueness to this character and their story in Dissida. I will say the enemy is also kind of unique, but not really. Like Dark Cloud is in her alternate costume is kind of a direct representation of what she looks like in Final Fantasy 3, which is pretty cool. This is where I'm a little bit confused. The original Final Fantasy 3 was released in 1990. Final Fantasy 3 remake for the Nintendo DS came out in 2006. Dissidia came out in 2008. Lunith already existed because he came out in 2006. So why did they choose to go with Onion Knight? My only guess would be that they started planning out and developing Dissidia back before Lunith came out, maybe. But here's the really weird slash cool part. Onion Knight's alternate costume in Dissidia is Lunith. They literally changed his hair and his eye color so that Onion Knight looks like Lunith. And I think that's dope. So if you already have Lunith's alternate costume in the game, why create a whole nother character? Why not just make Lunith? Personally, just because I wanted to feel that attachment to the main game, the moment I got the alternate costume for Onion Knight, I just kept it the whole time and I just acted like the person I was playing as was Lunith. Although in a way I knew that I wasn't playing as Lunith. I think as a character, I like that they made Onion Knight very childish. Honestly though, at times I felt it to be a little bit annoying, but I get it. He's supposed to be the youngest Final Fantasy protagonist out there. I will say his EX mode abilities are really cool because he can actually change classes as he goes into this EX mode. When you use the EX mode, and depending on what moves you use, he'll either be a ninja and go based off of the physical attack, or if you try using magic, he will turn into a sage. Both animations are completely different. They went to the trouble to giving him two completely different outfits, and all of his alternate costumes I think are different too for those versions. And again, the animation is different. I am for it. I am for Onion Knight's EX mode abilities and the throwback to the class changes. That's pretty cool. Which also makes sense why with Bart's they didn't also give him a similar thing where it was like, oh, he can also change classes and stuff, although that is a big thing in his game. They made Bart's a mimic, which is cool because the mimic job class is unique to Final Fantasy 5. Look at me, playing enough games to start to sound a little bit Final Fantasy adept. To start to sound a little bit Final Fantasy knowledgeable. Now, something that I do think is really cool in terms of fighting, Onion Knight has to be one of my favorite characters to use in Dissida. One of the best, in my opinion. He has such a wide range of long range move and close range moves. His magic is dope. He has a lot of bravery attacks that can turn into HP attacks. So yeah, he's just all around a super dope character. customizable character to use. Out of all of the characters that I've used so far, so Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6, he's my favorite character to fight with. We are so close to finishing phase 1 of this Final Fantasy Ultima experience. At this point, all I have left is to beat Final Fantasy 4 before we finish phase 1 of Final Fantasy, the Ultima experience. Okay, everyone, hopefully y'all enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think about Final Fantasy 3 down below. And really, again, just comment anything that you want. Talk to me about Final Fantasy. Thank y'all so much for watching. I love you all. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button if you have not joined the Wolfpack family. One of the most amazing families on this platform. I will see you all next time. Wolfpack.